Well, hi everyone. Welcome again to AuthorStory. I'm Alexander Lim, your host, and for this episode, I'm interviewing Rory Flynn, author of the book Dark Horse. And for those of you following along who are interested, you can go over now to the Amazon link in the description below the video and check out or get a copy of Rory's book. So Rory, welcome to AuthorStory. It's awesome and a real privilege having you with us now as our guest.
Great to be here, Alex. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Rory, please tell us about yourself and the book.
Well, there you have it. I'm a Boston novelist. This is the second in a series. The first was Third Rail. Dark Horse is the second one. I love to write dark fiction, sort of in the general crime mystery category, but with a little bit more of a difference. I tend to both write, stories that people find very compelling because they move right along, but also I put a lot of time into creating characters that people like to get to know. And I wrote this book as sort of a new version of, there's a lot of books written in Boston, based in Boston, and I wanted to take a different approach to it and sort of write about Boston as it is now. And I love writing this series, and I think that readers seem to enjoy it too. There you have it.
So, was becoming a novelist something that you always wanted to do?
Yes, I mean, a lot of writers I ask them that question, and it's usually yes, because it's a commitment, and I was a journalist for a while. I was, as a kid, I loved writing, articles, and was the editor of my high school paper and editor of my college paper, and went on to work in journalism. But so that's writing. But I also, behind that, wanted to not just write journalism. I wanted to write fiction, and I started doing it early, short stories and what have you. None of which were very good. Because there's a lot of practice involved, and I stuck with it. My first novel came out in 1992, and this is officially Rory Flynn's second novel. But as we've discussed, Rory Flynn is a pen name, and under my own name, I've written 5 others. So it's my own name being Stona, Stona, funny name, Fitch, and I love to write. So. Yeah, it started early, and I stuck with it because you get addicted to it.
So, who are your literary influences, if any?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, my mentor, as it were, is a writer, still is, a writer named Russell Banks, who is an American novelist who writes very well-crafted but very dark and beautiful American novels that do well elsewhere because they're universal. And but he's also got a great sense of humor and is just a remarkably sort of generous and lively person. So he was an early influence in terms of stuff that I read. I always liked crime and mystery. I read all the Agatha Christie and then later Robert Parker, Dennis Lehane, of course, Charlie Willeford, early stuff like that, and then. Yeah, George Simenon. I read all. He wrote so many books you can't read them all. And then as a writer, I mean, I just read everything. It's a lot. I mentioned, I just did a reading last night with a novelist, Megan Abbott, who has a new novel out called "You Will Know Me," which is fantastic. And it's a big cohort of dark writers of various stripes. Not all of us. We've all different takes on things, and we write different stories, but it's a remarkable community of people who write fiction that's very sort of disturbing and dark, but are, in fact, when you meet them, about the nicest people ever. So that's good.
So, Rory, before anything else, I'd like to talk a little bit about your company, Concord Free Press,
Sure.
Which is an interesting, marketing strategy. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, the Concord Free Press is an unusual, what I like to call a publishing experiment. We're a nonprofit organization. Started about 7 years ago. My wife and I founded it, my wife Ann and I, and my design director, Chris DiFrancesco, and a lot of other writers, Joyce Carlodes, Tom Parada, myself, Megan Abbott, Russell Banks, Gregory Maguire, people like that. We're all writers who wanted to do something new with publishing. So what we do, Alex, is we publish original books and we give them away for free to people who request them around the world, or people who receive one through our network of independent bookstores. And what we ask readers to do is give money to something they care about, or do something, do some act of generosity. And our first 10 books have raised almost $1 million in donations to, not to us, but to great causes. So at ConcordFreePress.com, you can read about it. And, it's a labor of love. It's a nonprofit. No one gets paid. And we do it because we like to do something interesting. We all do other things to make money. If you'd like to request a book, that's the place to go. And we've published what I'd like to think are some really interesting ones.
So, what made you decide to found the press?
Sort of demonetize the whole publishing process. It's it's an ancient idea, the idea of a gift economy that predates commerce. So we're going back to an old idea in that when we mail books to people, we don't even charge them for the postage. So when the book arrives, and it is a tangible book, it's a paperback, beautifully designed paperback. People always, their head spins because they don't know quite what to make of it. But it usually inspires, I always think that readers are among the most generous people in the world, because you have to be super empathetic to create a person, a fully realized person out of a bunch of words that you read. That holds true for writers too, because you got to make those characters out of words. So that act of empathy, which is called reading, I think is very powerful. And it started, back to your original question, I had a book called Give and Take, which had been sort of orphaned in the publishing community, and I said, I got to do something with this book, because I didn't want to let it just, shrivel. And so, I came up with the idea for the Concord Free Press because I worked at a nonprofit farm, very similar, that grows organic produce and gives it away to homeless shelters and meal programs and people in need. And it's decided to apply it to publishing, and other people were enthusiastic, and Give and Take got a lot of attention and generated a lot of generosity. And also then went on to a commercial edition. So even though our writers don't get paid, from us, the books can go on to other editions that are more normally produced and paid for.
So can the authors, maybe later sell their stuff on their own to another publisher if they want to get money?
Unless someone else puts it up there. And no one else sells them. What we ask is that people give them away to someone else, and books go through maybe 8 or 10 people. Some have gone through more. Some have generated thousands of dollars, which is pretty impressive for a little paperback. But then the editions that, to your question, Alex, the editions that actually sell, like on Amazon, are published by traditional publishers like St. Martin's or HarperCollins. But our arrangement with writer is you give us the book for free, but you still retain all the rights. So if it sells to film or it sells to other iterations, that they receive the money for that. Everybody wins. Everybody wins.
So, what made you decide to found the press?
Well, publishing's a crazy time right now, and writing fiction is it's a hard go in terms of making a living at it, and so it's so much of what you read about publishing is sort of depressing. It's like but we wanted to do something positive and interesting and fun and beautiful, and everybody that's been part of the press, has been glad that they did it, and it just continues to be a pretty amazing little story. And our 11th book's coming out this fall, and we just had a lot of fun with it, Alex, and people all over the world are part of it. It's not just we're based here in Concord, Massachusetts. That's why it's the Concord Free Press. It's it's one of those things that gets around.
So, can you tell us a bit about your most successful authors?
Well, two of them. We did a book by Gregory Maguire, who wrote Wicked, which is a huge musical, as most people in the world have seen. And he had a book that was very different from his other work, called The Next Queen of Heaven, which is a beautiful book set in a small town in upstate New York. It just wasn't, it didn't fit. Every writer that's got a big imagination, like Rory does, writes sort of the books that they feel compelled to write, without a lot of thought into, does this fit within somebody's big master plan for my career? So if you've read for a while, you got a book laying around that's sort of an unusual book or an outlier or something out of your normal genre. So we did that one, and it got written up on the homepage of Entertainment Weekly, and we do 3,000 copies of our books. We're getting like 5,000 requests an hour, and so we had to sort of turn off our website and turn it on like for 30 minutes a day to take requests. It was like opening a fire hose. Uh, that was good. We also did a book of photos set a French photographer, an American French photographer named Gilles Perez, who took photos in the Rockaways after Hurricane Sandy. And we did a collaboration with Kodak, did a photo book with Gilles and an editor named Hamilton Fish. And that book raised money for Hurricane Sandy relief efforts and did quite well because it brought a lot of attention to this area of New York that had been sort of underhelped. We have the freedom to do things differently because because we're not looking to make money at it, and as I always tell people, we're too small to fail.
Too small to fail, yep. Sounds like the opposite of what I heard in the press some years back, but yeah, okay, I reckon there is something to that.
Yeah, too small to fail. There you have it.
So, on to the book. Can you please tell us a little bit more about it, as well as the series itself? Without giving away too much, that is.
Sure. Dark Horse is a Boston-based crime novel featuring a detective named Eddy Harkness, who's a young guy who's sort of had his ups and downs. In this book, we meet him when he's sort of back in the game. He's running a unit called Narco Intel, which is a fictional narcotics unit of the Boston Police Department. And a huge hurricane has slammed into Boston, creating havoc, but also revealing the presence of a nefarious drug called Dark Horse. Each of these books is based around a drug of some sort. Dark Horse being adulterated heroin, that's high-powered adulterated heroin that's being used to clear out a neighborhood by evil realtors, real estate developers, and politicians. So it's about corruption. And the search for who's selling this drug and who's buying it, and and why it's thriving, why it's killing people. It takes Eddy Harkness and his crew, and there are other detectives and other people he works with, up and down the social and economic ladder of this area. It's based in Boston, but also in a small hometown, which is a fictional town called Nagog. And even though it's set in, physically in Massachusetts, I think every small town is sort of a microcosm for the world, and every city, even more so. So it has appeal beyond, people who know the turf. And like I said, it's dark, but it's funny, and it has a pretty big cast of characters. And what I have the most fun with is just sort of setting them in motion and seeing what they do.
So, how big is the cast of Dark Horse?
It's sort of a repertory cast, and there a lot of characters carry forward from third rail, but if you picked up Dark Horse and just read it first, you would definitely have no problem understanding it. It's not like it's not sequential. But this book has, about 6 main characters and probably a dozen minor ones. And the minor ones, I sweat the details because, I like having memorable character actors, people that sort of show up and they're quirky. If New York's about power and money, Boston's about smart and strange. Okay. So there's a lot of characters sort of on the fringe of things. There's a one-handed waitress. There's a one-eyed electrician. Everybody's got a problem. And they have unique, language and things to say and preoccupations, and that's part of the fun of it. But it all sort of fits together like a little machine, which is the challenge as a novelist, is to make everything fit together.
Wow, that is a big cast. I mean, if each character has his own or her own personality or story, it's probably not easy to write the characters into the scenes and keep them, consistent throughout the book or even the series itself.
Yeah, some of them just show up for a little blip, for a little scene, and then they show up maybe in the next book. Or there's a lot of characters that wander in and out of each of the books, and as a series, I want to write 5 of these. Uh, they have their moment, and then they may come back. They may go silent for a while. But the main characters, which are Eddy Harkness and his family and his sort of fellow detectives, uh, stay constant pretty much. And for me, it's not hard once you're Alex, once you're in the thick of it, and it's like telling a story. It's hard if you're really focused. You don't lose track of the punchline, or you don't lose track of the narrative thread, because they're all in front of you. I'm not a note card kind of guy. Track everything on note cards. I'm not that organized, but it's definitely, I do a lot of thinking through, and I also do a lot of drafts. So if someone doesn't need to be in a book, pretty much by the 3rd or 4th draft, I can tell that they need to go, or someone else shows up. And that's the fun of it, because you never know. You may start out with one idea, or a general idea, and where it leads you can be very different than what you thought. And I think if the process of writing a book is interesting and an exploration for you as a writer, it's going to be the same thing for the readers, an exploration and a trip into the unknown. And that's the kind of trip I like to take.
So, do you have, references so you can keep the characters consistent over time?
I don't keep note cards, like little organized cards, I mean, I definitely keep notes, and I've got notebooks. I'm looking at my pile of notebooks. Yeah, I mean, everybody who writes a novel has something they haul around with them, and it's, you see something, I read everything, I pick up stuff off the street, just to see what it says, and you find stuff, little details, someone will say something to you, and that all becomes filtered into either the novel you're working on or the next one you're going to write. So I do take a lot of notes, and I do a lot, as I said, a lot of drafting. But it may not be as organized as a solid outline.
So, Rory, the characters, Eddie, the narco intel crew, everyone else, are they based on real people, or are they just like, fully fictional ones you made up totally from scratch?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, it's funny because as you get further along as a writer, you tend to use a lot less like exact copies of people or relatives or yourself. Uh, these go further afield, but once you sort of come up with every character has to have, well, what's their driving, sort of ethos, and what's their goal, what is their flaw. And once you sort of figure out that, and maybe that's something you spotted in someone else or yourself, but then you build the rest of the character around it, using that core. And then they can end up being quite different from anybody physically, but they may still have some qualities. And it's strange because your friends will read a book, or other people, and they say, oh, that's X, and it has nothing to do with the person that you really were thinking about when you wrote it. And your first novel is always sort of about yourself, but then you get over that, and even though writers are endlessly fascinated with their personalities, you tend to look outward a little bit more, and there's plenty of interesting people out in the world, and part of our job as a writer is to capture some of that incredible richness of human behavior.
Interesting insight right there.
Bad and good, bad and good.
So, Rory, how much of it is real? Because it seems, very real, at least to someone like myself who hasn't been to the place.
Thanks, Alex. Well, yeah, I mean, it comes through. If you read a book and you sense, wow, this is, I think what people love about reading is they disappear into a world, maybe a world they've never been to, or maybe something they're very familiar with, but it becomes entrancing because it seems real, or it seems of a piece, it has to fit together.
So I'd like to talk about 3 elements in the book and, heck, in the series itself. And the first is that drugs are involved. Why drugs? I mean, Dark Horse is the drug featured in the book.
Well, it's based, there's a huge opioid, and heroin addiction problem here in the East Coast of the United States and elsewhere. And when I started writing this, it was just sort of emerging, and now it's sort of, a huge epidemic and political and, health, sort of topic. So it's based on, it is actually, as opposed to Third Rail, which was a fictional sort of smart drug, Dark Horse is adulterated heroin, so it is real-ish, but it doesn't exist. It's not like there's a brand named heroin called Dark Horse. And the reason why, as you identified, one of the three elements is drugs, because each of the books sort of centers around it, because my main detective is a narcotics agent. But I also think our culture has this endless, need for and fascination with self-medication and with prescription drugs and with trying to escape reality. And statistics are just shocking. Like I think some colossal percentage of Americans under the age of 14 or something like that have used some sort of drug. And so it's always, what intrigues me is like what's driving them to do that. What's the motivation? Why do people want various classes of drugs, and how do they end up, damaging themselves by doing that, and how do they then ideally escape it? So that's one element of each plot, because with a drug, you've always got someone selling it, someone using it, you've got unintended side effects, which could include death, and, you've got a crew of people trying to figure it all out, which would be detectives.
Now, the second element is corruption. And, let's face it, corruption's all over the place.
Yeah.
So I suppose that makes the story more dramatic and more interesting.
Corruption's everywhere. I mean, it's, Boston used to be known for sort of street level corruption and really tough guy corruption. It's more subtle now. It's all, it's big money and developers. And look at corruption. I mean, it's all over. Malaysia, the Prime Minister of Malaysia. There's just corruption at all different levels, because as someone wiser than me, knows power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. So, it's just given the chance to, a lot of people will rise to the occasion and become corrupt, or lower to the occasion. And that's not true for everybody. It's not true for every politician. Right now we have a fantastic mayor here in Boston, Mayor Marty Walsh, who I think the world of, who I think is not corrupt. So this book is fiction, and the mayor in this book is not the real mayor, but Boston has a long tradition of mayors who sort of go to the dark side.
As for the third element, well, this is a detective novel after all, and we all know that cops, policemen have their own unique ways of doing things, of talking, carrying themselves, and the like. So how real are the cops in this book compared to the real thing?
Well, that's always a good question. I mean, when people write novels with cops in them, there's sort of two schools. And I used to be a crime reporter, so I spent a lot of time with cops in Miami and elsewhere. And you can't, their world is so, so closed and so different and so unknowable. Like I'm not a cop, have not been, will not be. It's too late. I could spend months, and people do this too. Richard Price, Don Farr, who's a great writer. I spend piles of times in the back of, in the front of, ideally, police cars, sort of listening to it all, watching how it goes down every night. And that's one school of thought. Mine is that, I want to get the stuff right enough. I want the details to be plausible. I don't want to get bogged down in it, because the real stories I'm trying to tell don't have a lot to do with policing per se. It's human behavior, and policing is a mirror of it, and power and corruption. And the cops I have in my books, to be honest, if you are a real cop and read about them, you would say, these are not cops. They're too weird. These are too weird. And my main character, Eddie, does not, like a lot of fictional cops, it sort of plays by the rules to a point, and then sort of goes off the rails every now and then in any number of ways. And I don't think, I think he would not have his job if he behaved like that in the real world. And you gotta have some artistic license, because it's like reality. If you write about the reality of a day, I mean, unless you're James Joyce, or listen to a tape like of me talking right now, ultimately it needs editing, and reality needs editing, and so does policing, because unless you want to watch one of those reality police shows that's in real time, even those are edited. I mean, There's a certain fascination with watching things in real time, but with fiction, you got to sort of, cut to the chase, otherwise people get bored. There you go. Long answer.
So this is like your seventh novel, and for the average person, myself included, writing a single novel is intimidating enough. How do you come up with all these ideas for all these novels?
Oh, well, I think, hey, there's a lot of writers that have written a lot more than me. It's, you find it, you find a topic, you find a little piece of a story that fascinates you, and then it turns into something larger, and over time you sort of roll it around in your head like a marble, and it gets bigger and sort of changes, and that's the evolving part of it. Is just, you can sort of tell, is this enough, to entertain someone else? Because I think your job as a writer is to engage and entertain and create a world that a reader can explore. It's not just about me. I always tell young writers, like, just because you think it's interesting doesn't mean everybody wants to read it. And so the corollary to that is, just because it happened to you, in your life, something important to you, it may not be a novel, or it may not even be a story. So you have to sort of start to test all your assumptions, and it sounds like a cruel question to ask yourself, when you're writing a book, but you got to just ask yourself constantly, who cares? Who would care about this? Who would possibly care? And if the answer is no one, well, then you cut that sentence and you change that story. And then eventually you sort of come up with a story that has a life of its own. And those are the ones that make it into print. And I think people, even though publishing has its flaws, I think editors and perceptive, intuitive publishers still can spot, oh, this is a story that other people are going to find fascinating, and they make their way out into the world. And in terms of, I write a book about every year or 2 years, and it gets to be second nature. You can sort of tell when you have a book in your head, and each one's a little bit different. My stuff is pretty much defined within the broad category of dark fiction, but it's diverse within that category.
Oh, okay. Cool.
There you go. All right. And if anybody wants to write a book, I got to tell you, there's two rules. One, any draft is better than no draft. Okay. So sit down and write something. It doesn't matter if you think it's any good, because the second rule is all good writing is just bad writing that's been well edited. Okay. So you get your draft out by hook or crook, by any means necessary. Then you sit down and do the hard work of crafting, which is like, chopping wood and sanding it and making it work, and that can take a while. But if you stick with it, I think that and you have the compulsion it takes to tell a story and to finish it, you'll do it. Good luck to you. Good luck to you all.
Hey, thanks for that.
Good luck to all writers out there. All writers, pick your pen.
Cool. So, this may be kind of a dumb question to ask, but is there anything else, other stories or topics, that you might want to explore as an author in the future?
Huh. Well, that's a good question. I mean, the world is endlessly fascinating to me, and sometimes, because I've got this sort of mind that if I suddenly want to learn about Cuban land snails and the scientists who studied them in the 1930s in eastern Cuba, I'll read several feet of books about that topic and decide that maybe there's a story there somewhere, but even the exploration of it is interesting. If I suddenly say, wow, I don't know much about Greek history and the transition between Greek and Roman times because I didn't study that in school, and read a bunch of books around that, and maybe there's an element or an ancient story that you pull out and decide, wow, that's fascinating. Or if my family background, I'm from Oklahoma and I'm part Cherokee Indian, if I start reading about the tribal behaviors of various Indian factions in Oklahoma in the 1800s, maybe there's something there that's interesting, because it's all interesting. It's just, the question is it interesting enough for a general audience? And is the story singular? Is it not a story that's been told before? Because my interest in writing a book someone else has already written is really low, and you have to maintain a certain delusion that your story matters over the course of writing a book. And sometimes you do that by, just by drinking a lot of coffee. And other times you can just tell because the story has a propulsion and a heart of its own, and it just continues ahead, even if you have a day job and you're writing at 2 a.m. And even if you owe people money and you're not making any money on fiction, and even if everyone around you says, why are you doing this anymore? Which is, believe me, a story most writers will tell you, there's always some reason to stop. And, but you just plug away at it because you love it.
Hey, great words of wisdom right there for all of us.
And you find the things that you're fascinated with because they're out there.
Yeah, the wise man is in the house, people.
Oh, I'm so wise, Alex. Look out. Wisdom in every sentence.
Cool. So, in closing, our guest is author Rory Flynn. The book is Dark Horse, and you can find it on his website, mrroryflynn.com. That's MrRoryFlynn.com, and it is published by Houghton, Mifflin and Harcourt. Did I pronounce it right, Rory? Houghton?
That's close. It's Houghton. Houghton, Mifflin, Harcourt. HRH. HMH. There you go. I got that wrong. HMH. It's early. There you go.
Cool, thanks. And you can also check out Concord Press at concordfreepress.com. So, Rory, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for being an author story. It's a real honor to have you with us as our guest.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you everyone that's listening, and keep reading. We appreciate it.
Cool. And for those of you following along who are interested, you can go over now to the Amazon link in the description below the video and check out or get a copy of Rory's book. So bye for now, but I'll be back on our Author Story weekly interviews with another inspiring author.